The morning sun spilled gently over the quiet suburban street, painting the neat rows of houses in golden light. Birds fluttered from tree to tree, their songs drifting across the trimmed lawns and picket fences. From the outside, it looked like a perfect Saturday morning. Calm, ordinary, predictable. But inside the red brick house at the end of the cul-de-sac, silence carried a weight that had nothing to do with peace. Claire stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug. Her hands moved with steady efficiency, but her eyes lingered on the window where the reflection of her own face stared back at her. Tired eyes, faint lines she hadn't noticed before, lips pressed tightly together. She blinked away the thought and turned as Daniel entered the room. "Ready?" he asked, pulling on a cycling jacket, his voice clipped, almost rehearsed. "Almost," she replied, tucking a strand of blonde hair beneath her helmet. She tried to sound casual, but her words carried a hesitance she couldn't disguise. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. He adjusted the strap of his glove with brisk, deliberate movements, then glanced at her. "We'll take the trail past the reservoir today. Less traffic." Claire nodded. "That's fine." It was the kind of exchange they had often. Simple, civil, and yet beneath the quiet politeness was something taut, something unspoken that neither dared to press into words. Narration filled the silence of their routine. Claire had once loved these Saturday rides. They used to laugh, race each other down the long suburban roads, stop for coffee halfway through. Those mornings had felt like freedom. Now they felt more like obligation, rituals performed to maintain the image of a marriage that looked stable to everyone else. Daniel grabbed his helmet from the counter and snapped it into place. "Don't forget water this time," he said. Her eyes flickered toward him, narrowing slightly. "I didn't forget. The bottle leaked." "Still," he murmured, slinging a bag over his shoulder, "try not to repeat mistakes." "Depict." The words landed sharper than he intended, or perhaps exactly as he intended. Claire pressed her lips together, choosing silence over escalation. She slid the water bottle into the cage of her bike as though the motion itself were a reply. Outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. Their bikes gleamed in the sunlight, resting side by side against the garage wall. Claire ran her hand over the handlebars, grounding herself in the cool metal before wheeling hers out onto the driveway. Neighbors waved as they passed, unaware of the undercurrent. To them, Claire and Daniel were the picture of health, an active couple committed to shared hobbies. No one saw the way her smile flickered and fell as soon as their backs were turned. Daniel mounted his bike with practiced ease. "We'll warm up on the road first, then cut through the woods. Should be quiet this time of day." "Quiet sounds good," Claire answered softly. As the wheels rolled over asphalt, the rhythmic hum of tires against pavement filled the silence between them. Claire's thoughts drifted, memories of late-night arguments replaying, words that had bruised without leaving marks. She wondered if anyone else noticed how quickly Daniel's temper could flare, how his voice could become a weapon when the world wasn't watching. Description painted the scene around them, the sun climbing higher, glinting off Daniel's sunglasses, the shadows of trees stretching long across the road, the faint rustle of leaves hinting at a breeze. From afar, it was idyllic. Up close, it was suffocating. Daniel broke the silence. "You've been distracted lately. Work problems?" She hesitated. "No, just tired, I guess." "You should take better care of yourself," he said flatly. "People notice when you don't." Claire wanted to snap back, to tell him she was tired because she was carrying the weight of everything he refused to acknowledge. Instead, she just pressed harder on the pedals, letting the motion speak. Narration dug deeper into her silence. For months now, she had lived with a growing certainty that something had to change, that she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. But change required courage, and courage required timing. At the next turn, Daniel glanced at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her shiver, despite the warmth of the sun. The road narrowed ahead, leading into the wooded trail. The trees seemed to close in, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral of shadows. Claire's chest tightened. The air felt heavier here, though she couldn't explain why. Daniel slowed his pace slightly, looking back at her. "Stay close," he said. Claire nodded, though her mind whispered another truth. She wasn't sure she wanted to. The trail stretched forward, darker and more isolated than the bright suburban streets behind them. As the sound of the neighborhood faded into the distance, the hum of their wheels seemed louder, echoing against the silence of the trees. And though Claire kept her eyes on the path, a thought rooted itself in her mind with chilling certainty. This ride would not be like the others. The couple disappears deeper into the woods, leaving behind the comfort of suburbia. The air thickens with unspoken tension, and the ordinary bike ride begins to take on a sense of foreboding, a sense that only one of them may return. The suburban hum faded behind them as Daniel and Claire pedaled into the shaded trailhead. Asphalt gave way to dirt, and the crisp order of sidewalks dissolved into twisting paths swallowed by trees. Branches arched above, filtering sunlight into fractured patterns across the ground. The air smelled of damp soil and pine, a wilderness that muffled every sound except the grind of bicycle tires and the steady rhythm of their breathing. Claire inhaled deeply, but the freshness failed to soothe her. The woods, though beautiful, felt heavy, like stepping into a place that carried secrets of its own. She had loved this trail once. Now every bend seemed to press inward, narrowing her space to breathe. Daniel rode ahead, his back stiff, his cadence unwavering. He was always like this on rides, controlled, calculated, as if each mile were a performance. Claire trailed slightly behind, her eyes not just on the path, but on him, on the way his shoulders never relaxed, on the clipped efficiency of his movements. She wondered how many other parts of their life he performed in the same way. Her thoughts dug into memories. Nights when she had lain awake, listening to his steady breathing beside her, wondering what went on behind those closed eyes. Times when his words had been soft in public, but sharp as glass in private. And then there were the messages she had found. Innocent, perhaps, but strangely hidden. Colleagues, late-night exchanges, numbers saved under initials instead of names. She pushed harder on the pedals, anger mingling with doubt. "You're quiet," Daniel said suddenly, his voice floating back over his shoulder. "I'm just enjoying the ride," she answered. His laugh was short, humorless. "You've been enjoying the ride a lot lately." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he said quickly, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just, you seem distant, see." Claire's grip on the handlebars tightened. "Maybe because every conversation turns into an interrogation." Daniel slowed slightly, letting her draw level. His jaw was clenched, the vein at his temple pulsing. "I'm asking because I care, Claire. Don't twist it." The exchange ended as abruptly as it began. He surged ahead, leaving her in his wake. Description filled the silence. The trees pressed closer, tall and indifferent, their leaves rustling with a faint breeze. Sunlight broke in sharp streaks across the trail, momentarily blinding her before plunging her back into shadow. A crow called in the distance, its call echoing like a warning. Narration turned inward again. Claire's chest tightened, not just from exertion, but from the weight of everything unsaid. She thought of Emily, her best friend, who had once asked if she was truly happy. Claire had laughed then, brushed it off, insisting she was fine. But was she? The truth was harder to deny here, with nothing but Daniel's rigid back ahead of her and the suffocating stillness of the woods around her. She considered speaking about the texts, about her doubts, about the way he looked at her like she was a fragile object he both cherished and resented. But the words froze on her tongue. She had learned the cost of honesty in this marriage. They rode deeper. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed higher, but under the trees the light remained dim, filtered and fractured. At one bend in the trail, Daniel stopped abruptly, placing one foot on the ground. Claire braked to a halt a few feet behind him. "What is it?" she asked. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the only sound was the rustle of wind through leaves. Then, softly, "Do you ever think about us, Claire? About how much we've given each other, and how easily it could all fall apart?" The question lodged in her throat like a stone. She opened her mouth, but before she could respond, he pushed off again, pedaling deeper into the shadows. Claire followed reluctantly, unease prickling her skin. Hours later, the woods would be silent again. The hum of bicycles would vanish, replaced by the crunch of footsteps on gravel. A jogger, panting lightly, would round a curve in the trail. His eyes would catch on something unexpected, a lone bicycle lying on its side near the edge of the path. The chain still glistened with oil. The handlebars bent slightly into the brush, as though it had been abandoned mid-ride. He slowed, glancing around. "Hello?" he called into the trees. No answer. The wind rustled, shifting branches overhead. The jogger stepped closer, his breathing quickening. There was no sign of a rider, no movement, no sound, but the quiet drip of water from last night's rain. Only the bicycle, silent and waiting, like an unfinished story. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands. Somewhere in the distance, unseen and unheard, the forest held its secret close. The discovery of the abandoned bike sparks the investigation. The jogger's call brings the police, and soon Daniel must give his version of events, a version that will raise more questions than answers. The abandoned bicycle lay at the edge of the trail like an unanswered question. By the time officers arrived, the jogger who had discovered it stood nervously nearby, arms crossed, as though the shadows themselves made him uneasy. Red and blue lights flickered against the dense wall of trees, their sharp colors clashing with the muted greens and browns of the woods. It wasn't long before Daniel appeared, walking quickly down the trail, sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked less like a frantic husband and more like a man late to an appointment. His voice was steady as he pushed past the small crowd. "That's my wife's bike," he said, pointing toward it. "Claire's." Detective Harris, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" Daniel exhaled slowly, as if rehearsing the role he was about to play. "We were riding together. She went ahead, like she usually does. I told her to slow down, but she didn't. I lost sight of her." The words fell neatly, lined up in order, almost too clean. Harris tilted his head, listening carefully. "When was the last time you saw her?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe 30 minutes ago? I figured she'd be waiting for me at the end of the trail." Claire's bike rested silently beside them, the front wheel still turning slightly from the breeze. Harris crouched, examining the frame. "And you didn't think it was strange you hadn't caught up?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "She likes to push herself. I thought she needed space." Narration drifted into his demeanor. He wasn't shouting, wasn't panicked. His tone carried no cracks, no rawness of someone desperate to find a missing spouse. Instead, it was clipped, measured, as though he were delivering an explanation to a colleague. Another officer approached, whispering something into Harris's ear. Harris nodded slowly before turning back. "I'll need you to come with us, Mr. Walker. Just routine questions." Daniel hesitated only a moment before replying, "Of course." At the station, Daniel sat across from two detectives in a room painted in muted grey, the kind of room designed to make people unravel. A paper cup of water sat untouched in front of him. His hands rested calmly on the table, fingers interlaced. Detective Harris leaned forward. Start from the beginning. What time did you and Claire leave the house? Daniel answered smoothly. Around 8. We rode through the neighborhood, then took the trail. It's what we usually do. Detective Ramirez, younger, sharper in tone, asked, "And she was fine? No arguments, no tension between you?" Daniel chuckled softly, almost incredulously. "We've been married 12 years. Every couple has tension. But this was just a bike ride. Nothing unusual." The detectives exchanged a look. His phrasing was careful, too careful. "So she just rode ahead?" Harris asked. "Yes," Daniel said quickly. "She was faster. She wanted to go on. I let her. That's all there is." Ramirez scribbled in his notebook, his pen moving fast. "You say you saw her last about 30 minutes before the bike was found. But the jogger who discovered it told us it couldn't have been lying there more than 10. That leaves a gap in your timeline." Daniel blinked. A small crack. His lips parted, then closed again. He cleared his throat. "I must have miscalculated. Time slips when you're riding." The explanation was plausible enough on the surface, but the room seemed to grow heavier. Narration painted his posture. He leaned back slightly, his body language defensive yet composed. No trembling hands, no restless movements, just a stillness that unsettled more than it reassured. Harris tried again. "Mr. Walker, most husbands would be panicked right now. You're calm, almost detached." Daniel's eyes darkened. "And what would you have me do? Scream? Cry for your cameras? I'm doing what I can. Talking to you." "That's how we find her." His voice held a flash of irritation, the first true glimpse beneath the calm. Description pulled closer. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air conditioner buzzed faintly, but sweat dotted Daniel's brow. The detectives watched him like hawks, waiting for a slip. Ramirez closed his notebook. "We'll need to verify your route. Any stops you made, anyone who might have seen you." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Do whatever you have to." But the words felt less like cooperation and more like defiance. Later, as Daniel left the room, Harris muttered to Ramirez, "He's too polished. Like he's telling a story he practiced in the mirror." Ramirez glanced through the glass at Daniel's retreating figure. "Yeah, either he's hiding something, or he really doesn't care she's gone." The line blurred between grief and guilt, and for the first time, the investigation tilted. The missing woman was no longer just a mystery. Her husband was now part of the story. His calm demeanor, the first crack in a mask that might be hiding something darker. As police dig deeper, new voices emerge. Claire's closest friend, Emily, steps forward with pieces of Claire's private fears and whispered secrets, hints that the marriage was far from perfect. Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the file in front of him. Daniel's statements hadn't broken, but they hadn't convinced either. Something in his calm, rehearsed tone gnawed at the edges of the investigation. If answers wouldn't come from him, perhaps they would come from someone who knew Claire better, someone who had heard the things she'd never say at home. That someone was Emily Carter. She arrived at the station the following afternoon, her posture tense, fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Emily had been Claire's best friend since college, a constant presence in her life, maid of honor at her wedding, godmother to her niece. If anyone knew the truth of Claire's marriage, it would be her. The camera of narration followed Emily into the interview room. She sat down slowly, her eyes flicking toward the recorder on the table. "I don't know how much help I'll be," she said quietly, "but I'll try." Detective Ramirez offered a small nod. "We just want to understand who Claire was. Anything you can tell us helps." Emily hesitated, chewing her lip. "Claire, she was private. She didn't like people knowing when things weren't perfect, especially with Daniel." Harris leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Emily's voice dropped. She was scared of him sometimes. Not bruises, not that kind of thing, but his temper, the way he could turn a room cold in seconds. He controlled everything, what they did, who they saw, even little things, like what she wore to dinner. Her eyes glistened. She used to call me late at night, whispering so he wouldn't hear. She'd say she felt trapped, that she didn't know how much longer she could pretend everything was fine. A heavy silence settled over the room. Ramirez asked gently, "Did she ever talk about leaving him?" Emily nodded slowly. Yes, more than once, but she was afraid of what he might do if she tried. Narration filled in the cracks. Claire had built her life with Daniel, house, finances, routines that appeared stable on the surface. But beneath, she confided in Emily about an emptiness, about nights filled with arguments that left her feeling smaller each time. Then Emily's voice shifted, hesitant. "There's something else." The detectives exchanged a glance. "Go on." Emily twisted the strap of her purse tighter. Claire met someone. A man from her office. Michael. It wasn't supposed to happen. She felt guilty. But he made her feel seen. Alive. She told me she hadn't felt that way in years. Ramirez leaned forward. Was it serious? She was starting to think it could be, Emily admitted. She told me she wanted out of her marriage, that maybe Michael was the reason she finally had the courage. The forbidden name lingered in the air, heavy with implication. Harris scribbled in his notes, his voice low. So Claire was planning to leave Daniel. And Daniel didn't know? Emily hesitated again, eyes flickering with doubt. I don't know what he knew. But I do know this. Claire was terrified that if he ever found out, things could get dangerous. Her words carried the weight of hindsight, the sting of someone who wished she had done more. Description painted the moment. Emily's hands shook as she reached for the cup of water on the table. The detective's pen scratched against paper, the hum of the air vent filling the silence that followed. Finally, Emily whispered, I tried to convince her to be careful, to leave quietly without confrontation. But Claire was... Claire. She believed people could change. She wanted to give him the chance to be better, even as she prepared to walk away. Ramirez closed his notebook. Thank you, Ms. Carter. You've helped more than you know. As Emily left the room, her face pale, the investigation shifted again. C. Claire was no longer just a missing woman. She was a woman with secrets. Secrets that could turn a husband into a suspect, or a lover into one. With Emily's revelation, detectives tracked down Michael, the man Claire had been secretly meeting. But when confronted, his words reveal a deeper layer of guilt, passion, and denial, twisting the case in a new direction. Michael sat across from the detectives in the small, windowless interview room, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed on the scratched metal table, as if the pattern might provide him an escape. The hum of the overhead light seemed louder than usual, filling the silence that stretched between questions. Detective Ruiz leaned forward, folding his hands with deliberate patience, while Detective Harris studied Michael's every twitch and hesitation. From the moment Emily had spoken his name in hushed tones, Michael was no longer just a colleague from Claire's office. He was a potential key to unraveling the mystery of her disappearance. You worked with Claire at the firm, Ruiz began, his voice steady. But Emily suggests your relationship extended beyond the office. Do you want to tell us about that? Michael's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. He clasped his hands together, then quickly separated them, as though even his own fingers betrayed him. We were friends, he said, the word landing awkwardly, insufficient. We worked late together sometimes, talked a lot. She needed someone to listen. Detective Harris raised an eyebrow. Listening is one thing. Meeting in secret is another. Were you having an affair with Claire? The question hung in the air, pressing down on him. Michael's breath hitched, and finally, after a long pause, he exhaled. Yes, he whispered, his voice cracking. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. We tried to fight it. She told me things about Daniel. She was scared. She wanted out. Ruiz exchanged a glance with Harris. They didn't need to push much harder. The man was unraveling on his own. Michael rubbed his palms against his jeans, eyes darting to the mirrored wall as though he could sense unseen eyes watching him from behind it. Claire said Daniel had a temper. She never gave details, but she implied he was controlling. See, he didn't feel safe anymore. That's why she started confiding in me. Did she talk about leaving him? Harris pressed. Yes, Michael admitted, his voice firmer now. She wanted to. She was building the courage, making plans. We talked about it the night before she disappeared. She said she'd tell him soon, that she couldn't keep living in fear. But I swear... His voice cracked again. I swear I had nothing to do with what happened to her. The detectives let the silence stretch, watching as Michael's leg bounced nervously under the table. His admission shifted everything. Until now, Daniel had been the shadow looming over the case, but Michael's confession added a new layer of betrayal and motive. "Where were you that morning?" Ruiz asked. Michael licked his lips, clearly anticipating the question. "At home. Alone. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. I didn't see Claire that day. The last time we talked was the night before." "Phone records will confirm that," Harris said flatly. "But you understand how this looks. A married woman, ready to leave her husband for you, vanishes the next morning. You're telling us that's just a coincidence?" Michael leaned forward, desperation etched into every line of his face. "I loved her. You don't understand. I would never hurt Claire. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. If something happened to her, it wasn't because of me. It was because of him." His voice rose with conviction, but behind it was fear, and the detectives didn't miss it. Outside the room, through the one-way glass, Captain Lawson observed quietly. The affair was more than just scandal. It was dynamite. It gave Daniel motive for rage, Michael motive for jealousy, and Claire the most dangerous thing of all, a secret worth silencing. Back inside, Ruiz shifted his tone, softer now, almost sympathetic. "If you loved her like you say, then help us. Did Claire ever tell you exactly how Daniel might react if she left him? Did she say he threatened her?" Michael's eyes clouded. She never used the word threat. She wasn't that direct. But she once said something that's haunted me since. She told me, "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." The words landed heavily, drawing silence from everyone in the room. Harris stopped tapping his pen. Ruiz froze mid-note, and even Michael seemed startled by repeating them aloud. "Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" Harris asked sharply. Michael shook his head, his face pale. "Because I didn't think it mattered until now. I thought she was exaggerating, or maybe just venting. But now she's gone." His voice broke on the last word, and he pressed a trembling hand over his mouth. The detectives excused themselves, leaving Michael in the room, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for judgment from the mirrored wall. In the hallway, Ruiz muttered, "Either this guy's the best liar we've ever seen, or he's genuinely terrified." Harris nodded grimly, and either way, Claire's words just painted a very different picture of Daniel. The revelation didn't just complicate the investigation. It split it wide open. Was Michael telling the truth about being uninvolved? Or was his desperate love a mask hiding darker impulses? And if Claire had truly feared Daniel, why hadn't she told anyone more directly? Back in the interrogation room, Michael sat alone, wringing his hands, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. Somewhere between his guilt, his fear, and his love for Claire, the truth lingered, untouched but waiting. And as investigators prepared to confront Daniel with this new revelation, the story of Claire's disappearance twisted once again, leaving everyone wondering, was this a case of betrayal, of rage, or of something even more sinister? The air inside the precinct shifted after Michael's interview. His trembling admission about the affair, coupled with Claire's haunting words, "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident," cast Daniel's story into sharper scrutiny. Detectives Ruiz and Harris knew they had to return to the husband, peel back the layers of his carefully arranged version of events, and see what cracked when the pressure mounted. Daniel entered the interview room with the same quiet composure he had displayed before. His collared shirt was neatly pressed, his hair combed with mechanical precision, as though control over his appearance might anchor him against chaos. He sat with his back straight, hands folded on the table. To an untrained eye, he looked like a grieving spouse, patient and cooperative. But to Ruiz and Harris, the performance was beginning to fray. "Daniel," Ruiz began, spreading photographs across the table, "we want to revisit your timeline. You told us you and Claire left for your ride just after 7, correct?" "Yes," Daniel replied smoothly, his eyes lowering to the pictures without flinching. "And you said Claire rode ahead around the bend. That's when you lost sight of her." "Correct." Harris slid a still frame from a nearby convenience store's security camera into the center. "This footage is time-stamped 7:18 a.m. It shows you, alone, buying a bottle of water. That's several miles from where you said you last saw Claire." For the first time, Daniel hesitated. His gaze lingered on the grainy image of himself. "I stopped for water," he said, his voice level but quieter than before. Ruiz leaned forward. "That's not what you told us earlier. You said you turned back to look for her right away. No mention of a stop." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I must have misspoken. I was flustered. My wife was missing." Harris pressed on. "A witness also recalls seeing you near. Are the trail entrance closer to 8? That doesn't line up with the time you gave us." A faint crack appeared in Daniel's mask. His voice, steady until now, faltered as he insisted, "You're twisting things. I was distraught. I can't be expected to remember every minute clearly." But the detectives weren't just passing minutes. They were weighing every shift in tone, every slip of detail, every hesitation. Ruiz lowered his voice. "Daniel, when Michael told us Claire wanted to leave you, he made it clear she was afraid of your temper. What do you say to that?" Daniel's head snapped up, eyes flashing. For a heartbeat, something sharp and dangerous flickered across his expression before he smoothed it away. "Michael," he said with disdain, "was obsessed with her. He's lying to protect himself. Claire and I had our challenges, like any marriage, but she wasn't afraid of me." Yet his protest rang hollow, especially as Ruiz produced phone records showing late-night calls between Claire and Michael. Daniel's composure slipped further, his lips tightening into a thin line. As the tension thickened in the room, memories of their marriage began to surface in the narrative. Small moments Claire had confided to Emily, shadows of control and manipulation disguised as concern. Flashback. A dinner table set perfectly, Daniel correcting Claire sharply when she mentioned a work project Michael had helped with. His smile remained intact, but his grip on her wrist beneath the table was firm, leaving faint marks she later concealed. Flashback. A weekend morning when Claire mentioned visiting her sister. Daniel insisted she stay, arguing that she never gave him enough attention. She relented, guilt gnawing at her, the unspoken threat of his disappointment hanging in the air. Flashback. An evening argument over something trivial, the wrong wine, a delayed reply to a text, ending with Danny, Elle standing in silence, towering over her until she whispered an apology she didn't owe. These glimpses painted a portrait not of explosive violence, but of subtle domination, jealousy disguised as devotion, control masked as love. Claire had lived in a cage whose bars were invisible to the outside world. Back in the interview room, Harris's voice cut through Daniel's silence. "Here's the problem, Daniel. Every time we press on your story, it changes. First, you said you turned back immediately. Now it's a stop at the store. Witnesses place you in different spots. And your wife? She confided to others that she feared you. That's not just smoke. It's fire." Daniel's breathing grew uneven. For the first time, his voice cracked as he said, "You don't understand. She was my wife. I loved her. She just didn't see it." His last words broke, trembling at the edges. The room went still. Ruiz and Harris watched closely. Was it grief, or the weight of a crumbling lie pressing down on him? Ruiz spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Where is she, Daniel?" Daniel looked away, his eyes glistening. His lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating, as though the truth hovered just beyond reach. The detectives knew they had struck a nerve. His alibi, once neat and rehearsed, now lay in tatters, riddled with contradictions. His mask was cracking, and through the fractures, something darker threatened to emerge. When Daniel finally spoke again, his voice was low, almost inaudible. "I've told you everything I know." But the detectives left the room unconvinced. Outside, Ruiz murmured, "He's unraveling. We keep pushing, and eventually the truth will break through." The investigation was no longer a question of whether Daniel's story held weight. It was how long he could keep the pieces from shattering completely. And as night fell over the quiet suburb, one truth became undeniable. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the secrets became. The cracks in Daniel's alibi had left detectives restless, their instincts urging them that something vital still lingered out there in the woods where Claire vanished. After days of circular interviews and shifting statements, they returned to the trail with renewed urgency. This time the search was larger. Dozens of officers, volunteers, and dogs moving in coordinated lines through the dense canopy of green. Helicopters hovered above, their blades chopping the silence that had once made the trail a peaceful escape. Emily stood among the volunteers, her hands clenched in her jacket pockets. She hadn't slept in days, haunted by fragments of Claire's voice on the phone, those whispered words, "I don't think he'll ever let me go." Each echo pressed her forward, desperate to find some trace of her friend. By mid-afternoon, a shout rang out from the ravine near the far end of the trail. "Over here!" The cry rippled through the search party, pulling officers and volunteers toward the steep, uneven slope. At first, no one knew what had been found. Then an officer emerged from the underbrush, holding up a torn scrap of fabric, dirt-stained but unmistakably floral, the same pattern Claire had been wearing that morning. The fabric was damp, clinging together in places. A closer look confirmed what everyone feared. A smear of dried blood streaked across its edge. The air grew heavy, as though the forest itself recoiled from the discovery. Emily covered her mouth, her knees trembling. The sight was too much, confirmation of the dread that had been building since that morning when only the bicycle was found. Detective Ruiz crouched beside the ravine, his gloved hands brushing the soil. He spotted something else. Faint reddish stains scattered along the rocks, leading downward as though someone or something had been dragged. He signaled for the forensics team. "Mark everything. P. Photograph it all. This changes everything," Ruiz muttered. Within hours, news of the discovery spread through town. The missing person posters, once filled with cautious hope, were now seen through the lens of suspicion and death. Conversations whispered in grocery aisles, at gas stations, in small cafes. Did Daniel do it? Was it jealousy? Was it planned all along? The media swarmed the neighborhood. Their vans lined along quiet streets, cameras fixed on Daniel's house. The husband who once stood before them as the picture of composure now looked cornered, his front porch a stage he could no longer control. That evening, detectives returned to Daniel with the evidence. The torn clothing, the blood, the trail of drag marks leading toward the ravine. He sat stiffly, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. "We found her shirt, Daniel," Ruiz said plainly, "with blood on it." Daniel's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in his calm, but he quickly leaned back in his chair, exhaling as though unimpressed. "Blood in the woods doesn't prove anything. People cut themselves on rocks. Cyclists fall. That doesn't mean you can pin this on me." Harris leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "It means your wife isn't missing anymore. It means this is no longer a search. It's a homicide investigation. And right now, every shred of evidence points back to you." Daniel's silence was deafening. He didn't protest, didn't shout, didn't even demand to leave. He simply sat there, staring at the table, his jaw locked. The decision came swiftly. He was arrested that night, led from his home in handcuffs under the harsh glare of flashing cameras. Neighbors stood in their driveways, some gasping, others whispering, a few shaking their heads in grim recognition. They had seen the couple ride together countless times. None imagined it would end like this. Emily watched from the crowd, tears streaming as Daniel was pushed into the back of the police car. For her, the arrest wasn't relief. It was confirmation that Claire's warnings had been real, but the worst part was knowing Claire still wasn't found. Only pieces of her, scattered like echoes of her final moments. Back at the ravine, forensic teams worked under floodlights. Every fragment of dirt, every broken branch, every droplet was examined. But there was no body. No clear answer to the question gnawing at everyone. What exactly happened on that trail? The town lay restless that night. Families double-locked their doors. Mothers hugged their children tighter. And in the silence, the image lingered. The torn shirt, blood-streaked, fluttering in the evidence bag like a ghost, refusing to rest. Ruiz stood at the edge of the ravine long after the others had left, staring into the shadows below. Something about the scene gnawed at him. The evidence screamed violence, but the absence of Claire's body whispered unfinished truth. "Too neat," he muttered to himself. "He's hiding something, or someone else is." As the night pressed deeper, one fact crystallized. The discovery of blood had shifted the case from fear to certainty. Yet the truth itself remained tangled in secrecy. And the next steps, interrogations, courtroom battles, and unburied confessions, would decide whether justice was truly within reach. The image of Daniel in handcuffs still lingered in the town's memory as he was escorted back into the interrogation room. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting against the cold metal of the table where he now sat, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the wall as though avoiding the weight of what was coming. Detective Ruiz and Detective Harris entered quietly, their footsteps deliberate. They carried with them the torn fabric, photographs of the ravine, and the mounting silence of a case that was no longer about searching, but about proving. Ruiz placed the evidence bag on the table with a dull thud. "This," he said, "was found where the trail ends. It has your wife's blood on it. You've run out of versions of your story, Daniel. Now is the time for truth." Daniel's jaw twitched. He leaned back, exhaling sharply through his nose. "Truth?" His voice was bitter, almost mocking. "You think you'd recognize truth if it was right in front of you? All you see is what you want to see." Harris leaned forward. "What we see is a wife who confided to friends she feared you. A husband who lied about where he was. Blood on the trail. You're out of places to hide." For a moment, Daniel sat still, his breathing steady but shallow. Then his composure fractured. He slammed his fist onto the table, startling even himself. "She betrayed me," he spat. His voice echoed in the small room. "After everything I gave her, after years of standing by her, she wanted him." The detectives let the silence stretch, giving his anger room to unravel. Daniel lowered his voice, speaking more to himself than to them. "We were riding, just like always. I asked her if she was happy, if she still wanted this life. She didn't answer. She just kept peddling, looking ahead like I wasn't even there. That silence, it was louder than any scream. His hands trembled now, curling into fists and uncles, clenching. I caught up with her. I told her I knew about Michael. She didn't even deny it. She just looked at me, that cold look she'd started giving me, like I was some stranger she pitied. Do you know what that does to a man? Harris's voice was low but firm. Tell us what happened next. Daniel swallowed hard. His words came broken, fragmented, each sentence carrying both confession and justification. I grabbed her handlebars. I just wanted her to stop, to listen. She shoved me, told me she was done, that she didn't love me anymore. And in that moment, something snapped. Years of being ignored, years of her pulling away. It all crashed down at once. He pressed his palms to his temples, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to see me. But she fought back. She said she was leaving, that she didn't care what happened to me. I lost control. The detectives sat in silence, their pens still, their eyes locked on him. Daniel's next words fell heavy, almost whispered. She fell, hit her head against the rocks by the ravine. She was bleeding, gasping, and I just froze. I should have called for help, but all I could think was that she had chosen him over me, that everything we'd built was nothing to her. So I left her there. His voice hardened, chilling the room. If she wanted freedom so badly, I gave it to her. The words hung like smoke, toxic and suffocating. Ruiz's face remained unreadable, but inside he felt the cold weight of confirmation. This wasn't just guilt. It was a confession steeped in bitterness, wrapped in a twisted logic Daniel still clung to. Harris spoke carefully. You're admitting you confronted her about the affair, that there was a struggle, that she was injured and you left her. Is that correct? Daniel's eyes narrowed, but he nodded once, slow and deliberate. Yes, that's what happened. Ruiz leaned closer. Then tell us where she is. Where is Claire's body? Daniel's expression shifted. For the first time his composure shattered completely. His lips quivered. His eyes filled, but his words were mercilessly calm. I don't know anymore. I left her. The woods took the rest. The room fell into a suffocating silence. His confession gave them a story, but not the ending they needed. Without Claire's body, without final proof, the case was both solved and unsolved all at once. Daniel slumped in his chair, drained, shadows carving deep lines into his face. Ruiz and Harris exchanged a look that carried the weight of frustration. They had his words, but words without a body would be torn apart in court. As they left the room, Ruiz whispered, He broke, but not enough. The truth is still out there, waiting to be found. And beyond the interrogation room, the world waited too, hungry for justice, for answers, for the final piece of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Daniel's fragmented confession echoed through the town like a storm bell. The words, half admission, half justification, were enough to charge him with second-degree murder, but without Claire's body, the case moved into treacherous ground. And so the courtroom became the new battlefield, where truth would be bent, sharpened, and fought over like a weapon. On the first day of trial, the gallery was packed. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed outside, and neighbors who once waved at Daniel and Claire now leaned forward to hear the darkest corners of their marriage exposed. Claire's parents sat in the front row, her mother gripping a tissue so tightly it shredded between her fingers. The prosecution began with a stark narrative. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the district attorney intoned, this is not the story of an accident. This is the story of a man whose jealousy turned into control, whose control turned into violence. Claire trusted him. She rode with him that morning, and she never came home. They presented the torn shirt, the bloodstains, the surveillance footage, and most damning of all, Daniel's own words. The jury leaned forward when the recording played, Daniel's voice thick with bitterness. She betrayed me. After everything I gave her, I lost control. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument the prosecution could have crafted. But Daniel's defense team was prepared. They painted a different picture. A husband abandoned, blindsided by an unfaithful wife. This is a man who loved deeply, who made mistakes in a moment of despair, his lawyer argued. But mistakes are not murder. There is no body. There is no proof she is even dead. The state is asking you to convict on shadows. They emphasized his grief, his sleepless nights after her disappearance, the image of a man broken, not monstrous. Daniel sat quietly, dressed in a suit. That seemed too large, his eyes downcast, his hands folded neatly in his lap. To some he looked guilty. To others, simply devastated. The most piercing moment came when Claire's family took the stand. Her sister's voice shook as she described the nights Claire called, whispering fears that Daniel's temper was worsening. Her father's hands trembled as he held up a photo of Claire at her last birthday, smiling, unaware of what awaited her. And finally her mother, through sobs, pleaded, "She deserved better than this. She deserved to grow old, to be free." The courtroom held its breath. Even Daniel's mask slipped for a moment, his eyes glistening, though whether from guilt or self-pity was impossible to tell. Throughout the trial, the community fractured. Some whispered that Daniel was a monster who finally revealed his true nature. Others argued he was a man driven to desperation, a tragic figure rather than a villain. The absence of Claire's body became the shadow hanging over every debate, leaving space for doubt to creep into the jury's minds. Closing arguments cut like knives. The prosecution demanded accountability. Do not let the lack of a body erase the blood, the lies, and the confession you heard with your own ears. The defense pleaded for mercy. Do not convict a man when the very heart of this case, the woman herself, remains unseen, unfound. When the jury finally withdrew, the town held its collective breath. Hours passed. Families lingered outside the courthouse, neighbors debated on sidewalks, reporters speculated in live feeds. The verdict, when it came, was read in a courtroom so silent it felt hollow. Guilty of manslaughter. Not murder, not innocence. Something in between. A compromise that satisfied no one completely. Claire's family wept, torn between relief that Daniel would face punishment and devastation that her life had been reduced to a word that sounded smaller than the truth. Daniel showed little reaction, only lowering his head as the judge delivered the sentence. 25 years. Some in the gallery sighed in relief. Others whispered that it was too little, too uncertain, too incomplete. Outside, the town was left divided. To some, justice had been served. To others, it had slipped through their fingers, as elusive as Claire herself. And as Emily left the courthouse, her heart heavy, one thought haunted her above all. Without Claire's body, the truth would always remain unfinished. The verdict was in, but the ghost of the trail was still out there, waiting. Years passed, yet the weight of that verdict never truly lifted. Daniel served his sentence in a distant prison, his name fading from daily conversation, but never vanishing entirely. For Claire's family, time dulled the sharpest edges of grief, but never filled the hollow space her absence left behind. And for Emily, the trial's echoes lingered like a constant whisper, returning every time she passed the trail where Claire's story had begun and ended. The trail had changed with the seasons, but its silence remained the same. Once a place of laughter, of children racing bicycles and couples strolling hand in hand, it now carried an undercurrent of unease. Joggers avoided the deeper stretches. Dog walkers quickened their pace beneath the trees. The memory of Claire haunted the path, though no marker bore her name. Emily often returned there, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing at all but the weight of remembrance. She would pause at the curve where witnesses last saw Claire riding her bicycle, where sunlight broke unevenly through the canopy above. She would close her eyes and imagine Claire as she had been, vibrant, restless, filled with dreams she had shared during long talks over coffee. Dreams of travelling, of writing a book, of building a life that felt entirely her own. Those dreams now existed only in fragments, unfinished, unfulfilled, interrupted by betrayal she never saw coming. And that, Emily thought, was the cruelest part. Not only the violence of her end, but the theft of every possibility she carried within her. Sometimes Emily wondered if Daniel thought of her too, behind prison walls. Did he see Claire's face when he closed his eyes? Did remorse gnaw at him in the quiet hours? Or had he learned to bury it beneath layers of self-pity? The truth was unknowable, and perhaps that was punishment enough. But for Emily, it was not justice. Justice had slipped away in the ambiguity of a courtroom, in the gap between murder and manslaughter, in the hollow of a verdict that could never resurrect the life lost. What remained was memory, and the trail itself still bearing silent witness. Nature moved on, indifferent to human sorrow. Leaves fell, snow blanketed the ground, spring flowers bloomed again, and still the path carried walkers, joggers, and cyclists who did not always know the shadowed history beneath their feet. Yet for those who remembered, the place was transformed. Every breeze through the branches, every creak of bicycle spokes, felt like Claire's ghost passing through. One autumn evening, Emily brought a small wooden cross, simple and unadorned, and placed it against a tree near the bend. She did not carve Claire's name into it, nor did she explain to anyone what it meant. It was enough for her to know that the trail finally held a marker, however modest, that someone had once lived, loved, and been lost there. As the years went on, the cross weathered, its wood greyed, its edges softened by rain and wind. But Emily noticed that people left small tokens nearby, a flower, a ribbon, sometimes even a handwritten note weighted with a stone. Perhaps strangers felt the sorrow in the air and wished to acknowledge it. Perhaps they simply responded to the haunting pull of a story half told. And then one day, Emily saw something that stilled her completely. Leaning against the very tree where she had placed the cross was an old bicycle, rust creeping along its frame, its tires flat, its handlebars twisted slightly to one side. Whether placed there by chance or intention, it stood like an apparition, a stark reminder of betrayal, of love broken, of the irreversible cost of truth. Emily touched the cold metal, her hand trembling. In that moment, the years collapsed, and she saw Claire again, pedalling away with the wubby wind in her hair, unaware of the darkness waiting ahead. The image blurred into the present, leaving Emily with a certainty she had never quite admitted aloud. Some stories do not end. They remain etched into places, into memory, into silence itself. As dusk settled and the trees whispered above, Emily turned from the bicycle and walked slowly down the trail. Behind her the wheels did not turn, but they did not need to. The ghost of the trail was alive, and it would remain.